traps me right here. I can't move. All right, chapter 2. Yes. Can't tell you. All right. Here we go. Chapter 2, A Merry Christmas. Joe was the first to wake up in the gray dawn of Christmas morning. No stockings hung at the fireplace, and for a moment she felt terribly disappointed. Then she remembered her mother's promise, and slipping her hand under her pillow, drew out a little crimson covered book. She knew it very well, for it was that beautiful old story of the best life ever lived. What is the book about, Connor? It's the Bible. Mhm. And Joe felt that it was a true guidebook for any pilgrim going on a long journey. Soon Meg and Beth and Amy woke to rummage and find their little books also. What does rummage mean? Bottom of the page. Aiden? Mm-hmm. They kind of rummaged around to find their little books as well. One was green covered, another dove colored, and the final one blue. They each had the same picture inside and a few words written by Marmee, which made the girls one present very precious in their eyes. This is their only present on Christmas was the Bible under their pillows. All of them sat looking at and talking about them, while the east grew rosy with the coming day. Girls, said Meg seriously, Mother wants us to read and love and mind these books, and we must begin at once. I shall keep my book on the table here and read a little every morning as soon as I awake, for I know that it will do me good and help me through the day. Almost like morning devotions. Well, exactly like morning devotions. Then she opened her new book and began to read. Joe put her arm around her and, leaning cheek to cheek, read also, with the quiet expression so seldom seen on her restless face. Like for once, Joe was quiet and calm. Come, Amy, let's do as they're doing. I'll help you read the hard words, and they'll explain the things we don't understand, whispered Beth, very much impressed by the pretty books and her sister's example. I'm glad mine is blue, said Amy. And then the rooms were very still, while the pages were softly turned, and the winter sunshine crept in to touch the bright heads and serious faces with a Christmas greeting. Where's Mother? Asked Meg, as she and Joe ran down to thank her for the gifts half an hour later. Goodness only knows, replied Hannah, who had lived with the family since Meg was born, and was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. Some poor creature came a begging, and your ma went straight off to see what was needed. There never was such a woman for giving away victuals and drink, clothes and fire, and where has Marmee gone? Chloe? To help a poor family that came by asking for food. Well, she will be back soon, I think. So fry your cakes and have everything ready. When she says fry your cakes, it's basically saying make the pancakes, said Meg, looking over the presents, which were collected in a basket under the sofa, ready to be produced at the proper time. Why, wait a second. Where is Amy's bottle of cologne? She added, as the little flask did not appear. Oh, she took it out a minute ago and went off with it to put a ribbon on it or some such notion, replied Joe, dancing around the room to take the first stiffness of the new army slippers. How nice my handkerchiefs look, don't they? Said Beth, looking proudly at the somewhat uneven letters which had cost her such labor. Then a door slammed and steps sounded in the hallway. There's Mother! Hide the basket, quick! Cried Joe. Amy came in hastily and looked rather abashed when she saw her sisters all waiting for her, like a little embarrassed. Well, where have you been? And what are you hiding behind you? Asked Meg, surprised to see that lazy Amy had been out of bed so early. Well, I went out to exchange the small bottle of cologne for a larger one, Amy explained. You see, I felt ashamed of my present after reading and talking about being good this morning, so I ran around the corner and changed it the minute I was awake. And I'm so glad, for mine is the handsomest now. Why does Amy go to exchange the small bottle for the big bottle? Brooklyn? Kind of, sort of, but there's a bigger reason. Yes, she now thinks she has the best present, but there's a reason why she did in the first place. Manny? Mm-hmm. Yes. She felt a little guilty. Okay? After all this talk about being good and wanting to be the best for each other, she was still planning to give her mother the small bottle so that she could keep the rest of the money for herself. Another bang of the street door sent the basket under the sofa and the girls to the table, eager for breakfast. Merry Christmas, Marmee! Thank you for our books. We read some and we mean to every day, they all cried in chorus. Merry Christmas, little daughters. I'm glad you began at once, and I hope you will keep on. But I want to say one word before we sit down to eat. Not far away from here lies a poor woman with a little newborn baby. 6 children are huddled into one bed to keep from freezing, for they have no fire. They have nothing to eat, and the oldest boy came to tell me they were suffering hunger and cold. My girls, will you give them your breakfast as a Christmas present? What is she asking them to do? She's asking them to give up something. Luke? Mm-hmm. They now remember, this is not a very rich family. They probably had saved and bought some nice things for Christmas breakfast. That was going to be like their one joy that morning. Okay? They had maybe splurged a little bit on Christmas breakfast. But when the poor family down the street has nothing to eat, Marmee comes home and says, guys, we need to give our breakfast to them. And the girls are thinking, really? They were all unusually hungry, having waited for nearly an hour, and for a minute no one spoke. Then Joe cried out, well, I'm so glad you came back before we began eating. May I go and help carry the things to the poor little children? Asked Beth eagerly. I shall take the cream and muffins, added Amy, heroically giving up the article she most liked. Meg was already covering the buckwheats and piling the bread into one big plate. I thought you guys would do it, said Mrs. March, smiling as if satisfied. You shall all go and help me, and when we come back, we will have bread and milk for breakfast, and we'll make it up at dinner time. So their fancy breakfast has now turned to bread and milk. But the girls are okay with it because they know they're giving it to someone who needs it. They quickly got themselves ready, and the procession set out. Soon they arrived at the poor, bare, miserable room with broken windows, no fire, ragged bedclothes, a sick mother, a wailing baby, and a group of pale, hungry children cuddled under one old quilt, trying to keep warm. Can you imagine 6? Like if you were one with 5 brothers and sisters, all of you sharing one blanket. That's how they felt. And it's snowing outside, and you do not have heat. How those big eyes stared at them, and the blue lips smiled as the girls went in. Why are their lips blue, Edgar? Because they're cold. Ach, mein Gott! It is good angels come to us, said the poor woman, crying for joy. What is Ach, mein Gott? Brooklyn? Good. Okay. So she's basically saying, oh, praise the Lord, someone came to bring us food. In a few minutes, it really did seem as if kind spirits had been at work there. Hannah, who had carried wood, made a fire and stopped up the broken panes with old hats and her own cloak. Mrs. March gave the mother tea and gruel and comforted her with promises of help while she dressed the little baby tenderly. The girls meantime spread the table, set the children around the fire, and fed them like so many hungry birds, laughing, talking, and trying to understand the funny broken English. Das ist gut, die Engelkinder, cried the poor things, as they ate and warmed their purple hands at the comfortable blaze. Das ist gut means that is good. The girls had never been called angel children before, and thought it very agreeable. That was a very happy breakfast, even though they didn't get to eat any of it. And when they went away, leaving comfort behind, I think there were not in all the city four more merrier people than the hungry little girls who had gave away their breakfast and contented themselves with bread and milk on Christmas morning. Why were they so happy? They couldn't eat their food. Why were they happy? Edgar? Very good, because they helped someone else. That is loving our neighbor better than ourselves, and I like it, said Meg, as they set out their presents while their mother was upstairs collecting clothes for the poor Hummels. The Hummels is the family they went to go help. Not a very splendid show, but there was a great deal of love done up in the few little bundles or presents on the table. She's coming! Strike up, Beth! Open the door, Amy! 3 cheers for Marmee! Cried Joe. Beth played her gayest march, meaning her happiest or most lively music. Amy threw open the door, and Meg escorted Marmee to the table with great dignity. Mrs. March was both surprised and touched, and smiled with her eyes full as she examined her presents and read the little notes that accompanied them. The slippers went on at once. A new handkerchief was slipped into her pocket, well scented with Amy's cologne, and the nice gloves were pronounced a perfect fit. There was a good deal of laughing and kissing and explaining in a simple, loving fashion. Then they all fell to work. The morning charities and ceremonies took so much time that the rest of the day was devoted to preparations for the evening festivities. Necessity being the mother of invention, the girls put their wits to work and made whatever they needed to set the stage for Joe's play. So basically now the rest of the day is devoted to setting up for the play they're going to put on that night. But remember, they're not super rich. They need props for their play. So a lot of the props they end up making. Pasteboard guitars, gorgeous robes of old cotton glittering with tin spangles, and armor covered with the same useful diamond-shaped bits left in sheets when the lids of preserved pots from a pickle factory were cut out. Okay, so this is basically like they used broken pieces of glass to make diamonds on like their shields of armor. They used cardboard to make a guitar. So obviously they weren't like those real things, but they were pictures to represent those objects. Okay, very kind of like homemade props and costumes. The big chamber was the scene of many innocent revels. No gentlemen were admitted, so Joe played male parts to her heart's content. She took immense satisfaction in a pair of russet leather boots given to her by a friend, which she wore in her masculine roles. Who always played the boy parts? Class? Yeah. Joe and Meg certainly deserved some credit for the hard work they did in learning 3 or 4 different parts, whisking in and out of various costumes, and managing the stage besides. It was an excellent drill for their memories, and employed many hours which otherwise would have been idle, lonely, or spent in less profitable society. On Christmas night, a dozen girls piled onto the bed and sat before the curtains in a most flattering state of expectancy. There was a good deal of rustling and whispering behind the curtain, and an occasional giggle from Amy. Presently a bell sounded, the curtains flew apart, and the operatic tragedy began. Who's the audience? Who are they performing this play for? Sophie? Marmee? Only Marmee? A dozen other girls. A bunch of other friends they invited over for the play. A gloomy wood, according to the one playbill, was represented by a few shrubs in pots, green felt on the floor, and a cave in the distance, made with a clothes horse for a roof and bureaus for walls. In the cave was a black pot, with an old witch bending over it. A moment was allowed for the first thrill to subside. Then Hugo the villain stalked in, with a clanking sword at his side, a slouching hat, a black beard, mysterious cloak, in the boots. Let's see. This basically is okay. We're gonna skip all of this italic stuff. This is basically what happens in the play. Okay, which we could read, but we're kind of running out of time, so we're gonna skip that for now. After the play, thunderous applause followed, but was unexpectedly interrupted when the cot bed that they were sitting on suddenly shut up and extinguished the enthusiastic audience. Okay, so here's what happened. Have you ever had like a fold out bed? Okay, so a cot is like a bed that folds out like this. Okay, so all the girls in the audience were sitting on this bed. Well, all of a sudden they're all clapping, and at the end of the play, the bed goes, and all the girls get smashed together. Okay? The actors flew to the rescue, and all were taken out unhurt, though many of them were speechless with laughter. The excitement had hardly subsided when Hannah appeared, offering Mrs. March's compliments, and when the ladies walked down to supper. This was a surprise even to the actors, and when they saw the table, they looked at one another in rapturous amazement. Remember, all the food they had given away this morning. It was kind of like Marmee to get up a little treat for them, but anything so fine as this was unheard of since the departed days of plenty. There was ice cream, actually 2 dishes of it, pink and white, and cake, and fruit, and distracting French bonbons, and in the very middle of the table, 4 huge bouquets of flowers. Where did all this come from? It quite took their breath away, and they stared first at the table and then at their mother, who looked as if she was enjoying it immensely. Is it fairies? Asked Amy. Santa Claus? Said Beth. No, Mother did it. And Meg smiled her sweetest, in spite of her gray beard and white eyebrows. She still had her costume on from the play. No, I bet it was Aunt March. Aunt March had a good fit and sent the supper, cried Joe, with a sudden inspiration. You understand, their Aunt March, is very, very rich. You're all wrong. Old Mr. Lawrence sent it to us, replied Mrs. March. The Lawrence boy's grandfather? What in the world put such a thing into his head? We don't even know him, exclaimed Meg. So, old Mr. Lawrence is their neighbor that lives next door. Okay? He's kind of like an older man, all right? He has a grandson, Lori, who the girls kind of know at this point, but they're not like good friends or anything. So why in the world he sent them such a fancy meal? Okay, ice cream back then, super fancy. Nobody had ice cream back then. Okay? So that alone was a huge thing, but he sent them all this stuff. Why? Hannah, their servant, told one of his servants about your breakfast party, and that pleased him. Hannah, the servant, was talking to the next door neighbor's servant and told them about how the girls gave up their breakfast for the poor family. Mr. Lawrence chose to reward them by sending them an even bigger feast. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note this afternoon, saying he hoped that I would allow him to express his friendly feeling toward my children by sending them a few treats in honor of the day. I could not refuse, and so you have a little feast at night to make up for the bread and milk breakfast. Oh, that boy put it into his head. I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. He looks as if he'd like to know us, but he's bashful. Ugh, and Meg is so prim she won't let me speak to him when we pass, said Joe, as the plates went around and the ice cream began to melt out of sight with oohs and ahs of satisfaction. Who does Joe want to get to know? Edgar? The boy, Lori, his grandson. Okay? He seems like a nice guy, and he's kind of there all by himself, but Meg is so concerned about being proper that she won't let me talk to him until we've been properly introduced. So I haven't gotten to know him yet. Who's what? So, you mean the people who live in the big house next door, don't you? Asked one of the girls. My mother knows old Mr. Lawrence, but says he's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. He keeps his grandson, Lori, shut up when he isn't riding or walking with his tutor and makes him study very hard. We invited him to our party, but he didn't come. Mother says he's really nice, though he never speaks to us girls. Oh, our cat ran away once and he brought her back. We talked over the fence and were getting along capitally, all about cricket and so on, when he saw Meg and walked off. I mean to know him some day, for he needs fun. I'm sure he does, said Joe decidedly. He looks like a little gentleman, so I've no objection to your knowing him, if a proper opportunity comes along, said Mrs. March. He brought the flowers himself, and I should have asked him in if I had been sure what was going on upstairs. He looked so wistful as he went away, hearing the frolic and evidently having none of his own. What does wistful mean, Riley? Sad, yeah. He heard all the girls having fun upstairs and was kind of sad that he couldn't go and join them because he lives at the big house with his grandfather and nobody else, all by himself all the time. Man, it's a mercy you didn't, Mother, laughed Joe, looking at her boots. But we'll have another place sometime that maybe he can come see. Oh, perhaps he'll help us act. Wouldn't that be jolly? I never have seen such a fine bouquet before. How pretty it is, said Meg. I wish I could send my bunch of flowers to Father, said Beth softly. I'm afraid he isn't having as merry of a Christmas as we are.
That's the end of the chapter.
And that's the end, chapter 2.
No, we ended the whole book.
No.
No, we did.
Yay! No, we. No, it's a lot of.
All the stuff.
Yeah.